In the scorched Nevada Badlands, pilot Caleb Ward's ship crashes, stranding him in a desolate alien world. A haunting glow leads him to a shocking reunion with Queen Veyra, a Zorathian he saved years ago. As betrayal and war erupt, their past ignites a fight for survival. Dive into their epic saga right on. Like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more thrilling stories and to fuel our creative journey. The Nevada Badlands stretched out before Caleb Ward like a cracked, dry mirror, the heat waves rippling off the earth like a cruel mirage. His freighter, the Peregrine, had just made an unplanned, less than graceful landing. The ship skidding across the barren desert floor, grinding metal against stone. Sparks shot out like fireworks as the engines sputtered and died. The ground was littered with wreckage, the remnants of human technology, and broken alien flora scattered like abandoned toys. Perfect, Caleb muttered, wiping the sweat from his brow. The last thing he needed was to be stuck in the middle of nowhere, no one to talk to but himself. He ran a hand through his messy hair, his sharp eyes scanning the desolate horizon. He was a pilot, not a survivalist, but in situations like this, you adapt, or you die. The ship's distress signal had been sent. It would be hours, maybe days, before anyone arrived. He clicked open the emergency hatch, his boots sinking into the fine, powdery sand. The air was thick with heat, and the landscape was as dead as a graveyard. Caleb didn't care. He had bigger problems, like the fact that he had no idea where he was, and his ship was barely holding together. Then he saw it, a glimmer of light in the distance, something far too unnatural to be ignored. It flickered like the bioluminescence of alien flora, a haunting glow that pulled him forward. His instincts kicked in, overriding his exhaustion. He jogged, then ran, until he reached the edge of a dense forest of strange glowing trees. The soldiers appeared without warning, their figures emerging from the shadows like specters. Zorathians. Caleb froze, his heart skipping a beat. Before he could react, the world went black. He barely felt the sharp sting of a tranquilizer dart hit his neck. The last thing he remembered was the sound of rushing footsteps. When Caleb woke, he was somewhere else entirely, surrounded by towering bioluminescent spires and a green glow that seemed to breathe with life. The Zorathians had taken him, but for what? Then he saw her. She was standing at the center of a group of Zorathian soldiers, her violet eyes gleaming with curiosity. Her presence was commanding, her regal demeanor impossible to ignore. This was no ordinary Zorathian. Her gaze locked with his. Something stirred within Caleb. Something deep. Something old. His pulse quickened. She stepped forward, and for a split second their hands brushed. A shiver ran through her. The moment hung in the air. "You," she said, voice steady, but with a tremor beneath it. "It was you." Caleb froze. "What?" But before he could ask more, the weight of her words struck him. He'd known her, years ago. The same alien girl he'd saved. She was now standing before him, Queen Veyra of the Zorathian Enclave. But how was that possible? Caleb's head still spun from the strange, powerful shock of recognition. Queen Veyra. It was her. The same girl he'd pulled from that burning wreckage all those years ago. But now she wasn't just any alien. She was a queen, a ruler of the Zorathian Enclave, the same race he'd saved from the flames. Queen Veyra. Caleb repeated, voice, rough, a mix of disbelief and wonder. You're alive." She didn't respond immediately. Her violet eyes studied him with a quiet intensity, the weight of 1,000 years of alien history in that single glance. There was something familiar in the way she looked at him, something that made his chest tighten, a connection that he couldn't quite explain. The Zorathian soldiers flanked her, their presence like a wall of cold indifference, but Caleb couldn't pull his gaze away from her. Veyra's regal stance was as imposing as ever, but her expression, slightly softened, confused, was what caught him off guard. "I'm alive," she said finally, her voice low and steady, but her eyes betrayed something else, something buried, something personal. "And you saved me. I remember it now. You were just a child." Caleb's breath hitched. That memory, his memory, of a firefight on the outskirts of an alien settlement, of a burning ship, of a terrified girl, came rushing back in a flood of heat. He'd been 12, terrified, but driven by an instinct to protect. He'd given her his red scarf, wrapped it around her wounded body. He hadn't thought much of it then. He had only wanted to help. But seeing her now, alive and standing before him, made everything feel real again. "You were the one," Caleb whispered. "The girl from the fire. I gave you my scarf." Veyra stepped closer, her presence almost magnetic. Her hand reached out, trembling slightly, as she retrieved the scarf from a pouch at her waist. Faded, frayed, but unmistakably his. She touched it with reverence, her fingers lingering on the fabric. "It was you," she said softly, almost to herself, as if the realization had only just fully settled. "I've never forgotten." Caleb opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, the ground beneath them shook. A low, grinding hum filled the air, and the soldiers immediately snapped into action. "Draykon Alliance." Veyra's voice was sharp now, every ounce of her regal authority returning in an instant. The city trembled as the sky lit up with flashes of distant explosions. "Get down," one of the Zorathian soldiers barked, pushing Caleb out of the way. Without hesitation, Veyra grabbed Caleb's arm, pulling him deeper into the glowing corridors of the Enclave. "You've been caught in a war. Human," she said, urgency in her voice. "But this is not your fight. Stay out of it. I've already fought this fight once." Caleb shot back, his heart pounding. "And I'm not about to back down now." But Veyra wasn't listening. She pulled him forward into the heart of the Enclave as chaos erupted around them. The Enclave was a world apart, its surreal beauty both captivating and haunting. The bioluminescent towers loomed like sentinels, glowing with hues of blue and violet, casting a soft, otherworldly light over the glowing trees and alien flora that dotted the landscape. As Caleb was pulled deeper into the heart of the Enclave, his senses were assaulted by the strangeness of it all. The air here hummed with an energy that felt alien and alive, yet strangely comforting. Every surface was smooth and metallic, with organic curves that seemed to breathe with the pulse of the city. He barely had time to take it all in before Veyra yanked him into a nearby chamber. The chaos outside, Zorathian soldiers scrambling to defend the Enclave from the Draykon Alliance's attack, faded into the background as the heavy door shut behind them. Inside, the quiet was deafening, the only sound the soft trickle of water from a nearby fountain. Veyra's face was a mask of control, but Caleb could see the tightness in her jaw, the way her hands trembled ever so slightly as she turned to face him. Her royal composure was still intact, but there was something else, something raw. "Stay here," she commanded, her voice cold, distant. "I need to organize the defense of the Enclave." Caleb's heart raced. "Not a chance," he snapped. He wasn't about to let her walk into danger without him. "I'm here to help whether you like it or not." Veyra's violet eyes flickered with something unreadable. She hesitated for a split second before nodding, clearly realizing there was no changing his mind. The tension between them was palpable, but they both knew they had to focus on the attack. For now, they made their way through narrow hallways until they reached the center of the Enclave, a sprawling courtyard with a glowing fountain at its heart. The air here was thick with the smell of alien blooms, and the fountain's water pulsed with light, casting shimmering reflections on the walls. Caleb couldn't help but stare, fascinated by the strange beauty of it all. But Veyra, still holding herself together, moved straight to the center of the courtyard and stopped by the fountain. Her posture was poised, but her mind seemed miles away. For a moment, there was only the sound of the water. Caleb wasn't sure if he should speak or not, but the weight of the silence was unbearable. Then Veyra spoke, her voice soft yet heavy with emotion. "When I was a child, there was an attack on my ship. The Draykon were ruthless, but there was a human boy. He saved me." Caleb's breath caught in his chest. The words, the memory. He knew what she was talking about, but he couldn't let himself believe it. She was talking about him. I was only 12. Caleb said, his voice rough. I was with my father on a salvage mission near the outskirts of a Draykon base. There was a fire, a wreck. I remember you, but I thought I'd imagined it. A girl barely conscious, wrapped in a red scarf. I gave you my scarf. Veyra's gaze softened, her eyes reflecting the fountain's glow. She slowly reached into the folds of her cloak and pulled out the same red scarf, now faded and frayed, but unmistakably the one Caleb had given her. It was you, she whispered, her voice trembling. You saved me! Caleb's pulse hammered in his ears as she held out the scarf, her fingers brushing his as he took it. Time seemed to slow. The moment was surreal, charged with a sense of recognition that neither of them had been able to name until now. But just as quickly as the intimacy of the moment had appeared, the sound of approaching footsteps shattered it. Caleb's heart skipped, and Veyra's hand instinctively reached for a hidden weapon at her side. It's him, Veyra said, her voice, low, eyes flashing with something Caleb couldn't place. Korath. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the light of the courtyard. His features were sharp, his eyes cold, and his posture was the kind of intimidating that made even Caleb, who'd spent years in hostile territory, take a step back. Veyra, the man said, his voice like gravel. We need to talk. The Draykon aren't our only concern right now. Veyra's expression hardened. What do you mean? She demanded. Korath's gaze flickered to Caleb, then back to her. The traitor is within your council. We don't have much time. Before Caleb could even process the weight of Korath's words, the ground trembled beneath their feet. A deep rumble echoed through the enclave, and the air grew thick with the scent of burning metal and ozone. The attack was escalating. The fountain's glow flickered, casting eerie shadows over the courtyard. Caleb looked between Veyra and Korath, his heart racing. Something was happening, and the stakes were rising faster than he could keep up. Let's go, Veyra commanded, her voice no longer just regal, but urgent. Caleb didn't argue. He had no choice but to follow. They ran toward the exit, the weight of their shared past and the chaos unfolding outside pressing down on him like a vice. But one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. The Zorathian Enclave erupted into chaos. The ground shook violently as explosions rang out, the sky lit with flashes of green and purple energy. Caleb followed Veyra and Korath through the winding hallways, his pulse thundering in his ears. The attack was more than just a raid. This was an all-out assault. The Draykon Alliance had come for something, and they weren't leaving until they got it. The sounds of weapons fire echoed down the corridors, and Caleb instinctively reached for his sidearm. Veyra moved ahead of him, her posture unyielding, but there was an edge to her usually composed demeanor. She was no longer the regal queen who had welcomed him into the Enclave. She was a leader, a commander, her face hard with determination. How many are there? Caleb shouted over the noise as they rushed through the labyrinth of alien architecture. Too many, Veyra replied curtly, and there's someone else in play. Korath's voice cut through the chaos, low and dangerous. The traitor's been busy. We're not just facing the Draykon. There's a mole within the council, someone feeding them intel. Damn it, Caleb muttered under his breath. His mind raced. A traitor within the Zorathian ranks. That meant everything was in jeopardy. His eyes flickered to Veyra. Her expression was unreadable, but the tension in her shoulders spoke volumes. Whoever this traitor was, they were close. Too close. They reached the central command center, a large chamber filled with holographic displays, flickering lights, and the hum of Zorathian tech. The room was a flurry of activity. Soldiers rushing in and out, communicating with each other through a web of encrypted channels. Veyra's second-in-command, a broad-shouldered Zorathian named Zarek, looked up as they entered. Your Majesty, Zarek shouted, rushing to her side. His armor was scorched, his face streaked with dirt, but his voice remained steady. The Draykon forces are pushing through the northern barricades. They've got us outnumbered 3-1. We can't hold them much longer. Caleb's eyes scanned the chaos, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his chest. They needed a plan fast. "Hold them at the western gates," Veyra ordered, her voice carrying authority despite the chaos. "Zarak, take your team and reinforce the northern flank. Korath, you're with me." Korath nodded without a word, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the data streaming across the holographic screens. Caleb felt a flicker of unease. There was something off about Korath's quiet demeanor, like he knew more than he was letting on. But now wasn't the time to dig deeper. As they rushed to the gates, the unmistakable sound of gunfire echoed down the corridor, followed by a blast that rattled the walls. The Draykon were here. Caleb ducked instinctively as a plasma bolt streaked past him, narrowly missing his shoulder. He fired back, the sharp crack of his weapon slicing through the chaos. Veyra was already ahead of him, her own weapon raised, taking down Draykon soldiers with precision. Her movements were fluid-controlled. This was a queen in her element, commanding and deadly. But just as they reached the outer gates, the real danger revealed itself. A shadow detached itself from the chaos. One of the Zorathian council members, Councillor Thryme, his eyes locked with Veyra's, a cold smirk playing on his lips. "Did you really think you could stop this?" Thryme's voice was a low growl, his weapon aimed directly at Veyra. Before anyone could react, Thryme fired his blaster's beam, striking the control panel beside the gate. Sparks exploded from the machinery, and the gates fell into a chaotic shutdown. "No," Veyra shouted. Rushing forward to assess the damage, Caleb's heart dropped into his stomach. He knew now, Thryme was the traitor, and they had just lost their last line of defense. The gates opened to the roar of the Draykon forces, and Caleb braced himself for the fight of his life. The Zorathian Enclave was crumbling. The Draykon Alliance had breached the gates, and the once peaceful city was now a battleground. Caleb barely had time to process the depth of the betrayal before Veyra yanked him along, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Korath was already ahead, his movements deliberate and quick, cutting through the chaos like a shadow. Caleb followed, but the weight of Thryme's betrayal, his former ally now revealed as the enemy, hung heavy in his chest. "We need to get out of here," Veyra said, her voice low, but filled with urgency. "The Gulf Nebula is our only option." Caleb didn't argue. He didn't know what the Gulf Nebula was, but it sounded like the only place left to run. The glowing alien city was falling apart behind them, and their only chance at survival rested on finding the hidden station Korath had mentioned earlier. The trio sprinted through the wreckage of the Enclave, dodging falling debris, the air thick with the acrid smell of burning metal and the crackle of distant explosions. They reached the hidden transport pad, just as a volley of plasma bolts ricocheted off the walls nearby. Caleb hit the ground instinctively, his heart pounding, but Veyra and Korath were already inside the ship. "Get in," Korath shouted. His voice strained but urgent. Caleb didn't waste a second. He bolted toward the transport ship, diving inside, just as the ramp began to close. The ship lifted off the ground with a thunderous roar, and for a brief moment Caleb allowed himself to breathe. But the relief was short-lived. The sky above the Enclave was alive with the flash of plasma fire and the shriek of Draykon ships descending on their position. As the transport ship sped away, Caleb watched the Enclave grow smaller and smaller until it was nothing but a distant glow on the horizon. The weight of everything they'd just lost, the city, the people, the betrayal, pressed down on him. Veyra sat in the cockpit, her face a mask of stoic determination. Caleb stood behind her, gripping the seat as Korath worked the controls. The ship lurched as they entered the Gulf Nebula's electromagnetic storm. Caleb felt the ship shudder under the pressure, the outer hull flickering with energy. The storm outside was a swirling mass of jagged lightning and dark clouds, a perfect reflection of the chaos in their lives. "We're not out of the woods yet," Korath muttered, glancing at the instruments. "Stay sharp." Caleb's eyes narrowed. The Gulf Nebula wasn't just a refuge, it was their last hope. But even here in the heart of the storm, danger was still close on their heels. The Gulf Nebula loomed ahead, a vast expanse of churning clouds and flickering energy, a storm that seemed as old as time itself. Caleb sat tensely in the transport ship's back compartment, his eyes fixed on the swirling chaos outside the viewports. The storm battered the ship, sending jolts of static electricity coursing through the hull, but Korath piloted with eerie precision, navigating the deadly electromagnetic mists. The tension inside the ship was suffocating. Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The Zorathian betrayal, Thryme's treason, had ripped the last shreds of trust from the already fragile alliance. They had been deceived, and the truth now sat heavily on his chest, a reminder that their enemies were closer than they'd ever imagined. Korath remained silent, his hands steady on the controls. Veyra, too, was unnervingly quiet. She stared out the cockpit window, her expression unreadable, lost in thought. Caleb glanced at her, but she refused to meet his gaze. After what felt like hours of navigating the tempest, Korath's voice broke the silence. "We're approaching the station," he said, his tone clipped. "Prepare yourselves. We need to move fast." The station, hidden within the heart of the nebula, flickered into view, an ancient crumbling structure that barely seemed to exist in the chaotic storm. It was a fortress hidden in plain sight, and yet it had been the Zorathians' last secret, the only safe place left to regroup. As the ship docked, Caleb couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. They had reached the station, but was it truly safe? Was Korath their ally, or was he hiding something even darker? The ramp hissed open, and they stepped onto the metal floor of the hidden station. The air inside was stale heavy with the scent of old machinery. Korath led the way down the narrow hallway, his steps echoing ominously in the silence. "We need to access the mainframe," Korath said, glancing back at them. "The data we need is locked inside. We'll have to break through the system's defenses." Caleb felt a chill run through him. They were about to uncover something that might change everything. As they reached the central control room, Korath tapped a series of keys, and the screen flickered to life, revealing a map of the Enclave. Veyra's breath caught in her throat as the image appeared on the screen. "Thryme," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's been working with the Draykon all along." A sudden, sharp sound cut through the tension, a burst of static followed by an unfamiliar voice on the comms. "Veyra, you should have known better." It was Thryme. The screen flashed red, and before anyone could react, the station's alarms blared, and the entire facility shook as a blast of energy hit the station's core. "Get to the escape pods now." Korath barked, his voice suddenly sharp with urgency. The walls trembled as another blast rang out, and Caleb's stomach churned. There was no time to waste. Thryme had set them up. "Move," Veyra ordered, and they sprinted for the escape pods, the sound of Thryme's betrayal reverberating in their minds. The escape pod bucked violently as it descended through the atmosphere, the storm clouds of the Gulf Nebula still raging behind them. Caleb gripped the handles tight, his knuckles white as he glanced over at Veyra. She was focused, eyes narrowed, her expression as unreadable as ever. Korath sat at the controls, his jaw clenched, his hands moving with practiced ease as he steered them toward the city below. "Miami Prime is our only chance," Korath muttered under his breath, but Caleb could hear the strain in his voice. "We need to warn the High Court about Thryme before it's too late." Miami Prime was the jewel of Zorathian civilization on Earth. A sprawling metropolis of towering coral-like spires, it glowed with iridescent hues, a testament to the Zorathians' mastery over both nature and technology. But tonight it felt like a gilded cage. They had escaped the storm, but the real battle was just beginning. The escape pod jolted as it broke through the clouds and descended into the city. Caleb's heart pounded in his chest. His mind kept drifting back to the events of the Gulf Nebula, Korath's cryptic warnings, the data they'd uncovered, and the devastating truth that Thryme had betrayed them all. The Draykon were coming, and with the mole in their ranks, everything was on the brink of collapse. The pod touched down with a soft thud, and the hatch slid open with a hiss. The moment they stepped onto the landing platform, a team of Zorathian soldiers rushed to meet them. The air was thick with tension. Every soldier's gaze lingered on Veyra, their queen, but Caleb could feel the weight of the moment in the air. No one was sure if she would remain queen after everything that had happened. "Your Majesty," one of the soldiers spoke, bowing deeply. "The High Court is waiting for you." Veyra nodded curtly, her regal demeanor back in full force. "Lead the way," she commanded. Caleb followed her through the labyrinth of corridors, his footsteps echoing against the polished floors. The grandeur of Miami Prime was undeniable. The city was alive, but underneath its beauty, Caleb could sense the political turmoil that simmered just beneath the surface. No one knew who could be trusted anymore, and everyone knew the consequences of failing to act. They reached the High Court, a vast chamber, surrounded by gleaming pillars and a dome-shaped ceiling that seemed to stretch into infinity. The court was filled with the highest-ranking members of the Zorathian hierarchy, their eyes fixed on Veyra as she entered. She held her head high, but Caleb saw the flicker of doubt in her gaze as she walked past them. "Your Majesty," a deep voice called out from the center of the room. "We've been waiting for your report on the Draykon threat." Veyra stepped forward, her voice steady as she addressed the court. "The Draykon have been working with a traitor from within our own ranks. Councillor Thryme has been funneling information to the enemy. He is responsible for the attack on the Enclave." The room fell into a stunned silence. Caleb's heart raced. This was it. The moment they would either expose the truth or risk losing everything. The court's murmurs swelled as the faces of the council members contorted in disbelief. A few whispered. Some even looked at each other, as if expecting an immediate reaction. Before anyone could respond, a harsh, gravelly voice broke through the silence. "Lies Veyra." Thryme's voice echoed from the rear of the court, his figure emerging from the shadows, his eyes locked with Veyra's, a cold smile spreading across his face. "You think they'll believe you over me?" Veyra's expression hardened, and Caleb could see the steel behind her gaze. "It's over." "Thryme, Veyra," said her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You've already betrayed us." Without warning, Thryme raised his hand, signaling for his guards to move. The soldiers stationed around the court reacted instantly, drawing their weapons. Caleb's hand flew to his sidearm, but before he could act, Veyra was already stepping forward, her voice commanding, "Seize him." Veyra shouted, the force of her words filling the entire chamber. The High Court erupted into chaos as Zorathian soldiers loyal to Veyra surged forward, tackling Thryme's guards to the ground. Caleb dove behind a pillar, watching the scene unfold, his mind working furiously. There was no turning back now. Thryme was cornered, but Caleb knew that even if they captured him, the Draykon Alliance wasn't far behind. Veyra stood tall, watching as her enemies were subdued. Thryme was brought to his knees, his expression one of fury. But there was something else there too, something like fear. "Your reign is over," Veyra said coldly, her voice like ice. "The truth will always find its way." As the soldiers took Thryme away, Veyra turned toward Caleb. Her eyes locked with his, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to stop. She was still their queen, but Caleb knew the fight was far from over. "They'll come for us," Caleb said, his voice low, "and we won't have much time." Veyra nodded, the weight of the responsibility resting heavily on her shoulders. "Then we fight." The court was a battlefield now, and the future of the Zorathian Enclave hung in the balance. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. Thryme, the traitor who had once been an ally, now knelt at Veyra's feet, his face twisted in a sneer of defiance. The Zorathian High Court, filled with whispers and murmurs, watched in stunned silence as the truth of his betrayal unfolded before them. But Caleb knew this wasn't over. Thryme had allies. He wouldn't go down without a fight. Take him to the detention chamber. One of the senior council members ordered, his voice trembling with barely concealed fear. Veyra stood tall, her regal composure unwavering as she stepped forward. Her eyes locked on Thryme's. "No," she said, her voice calm but firm. "He's no longer to be trusted. He's a danger to our people." Thryme's eyes flashed with anger, his lips curling into a vicious grin. "You think this will end well for you, Veyra?" His voice was low, menacing. "You're too naive. The Draykon will burn this world to the ground, and you'll be nothing more than a forgotten queen." Before anyone could react, the ground beneath them trembled violently, followed by a deafening explosion that rocked the entire chamber. The walls shuddered, and the air filled with a loud, shrill whine as the entire building's structural integrity began to collapse. "It's happening!" Veyra's voice cut through the panic as the ceiling above them cracked and debris began to fall. The Draykon had launched a full-scale attack. Caleb's heart raced. The Draykon hadn't just infiltrated their ranks. They were here right now, laying waste to the city. His hand shot to his blaster, and in the chaos, Veyra's soldiers scrambled to shield the court members from the falling rubble. "Move!" Caleb shouted to Veyra as he grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the exit. The walls groaned, and a second explosion tore through the building's lower levels, sending a blast of heat and dust toward them. The air thickened with smoke, making it hard to see or breathe. Panic set in, but Caleb couldn't afford to lose focus. "Stay close," he barked as they ran down the crumbling corridor. Veyra kept pace, her gaze scanning every corner, every shadow. Her leadership instincts were in overdrive, but even she couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. The hallways were a war zone. Zorathian soldiers fired their weapons at incoming Draykon soldiers, who had breached the city's defenses with terrifying efficiency. Plasma bolts streaked across the air, slamming into walls, creating showers of sparks that illuminated the smoke-filled corridor. "Up ahead," Caleb shouted, pointing toward a stairwell that led deeper into the palace. They charged toward it, ducking behind pillars and walls as the explosions continued to reverberate through the building. Caleb's pulse thundered in his ears, adrenaline coursing through him. This was it. No more running. They had to fight or die. As they reached the stairwell, a massive Draykon warrior appeared at the top of the stairs, a hulking figure clad in black armor, a massive rifle aimed directly at them. Caleb didn't hesitate. He fired first the shot, catching the Draykon off guard, but it didn't take him down. The warrior fired back, narrowly missing Caleb's head as the bolt scorched the air where he had just been standing. "Veyra!" Caleb yelled, pushing her toward cover. "Stay low." Veyra didn't need to be told twice. She darted to the side, her eyes focused and steady as she drew her own weapon. In one fluid motion, she fired her blaster bolt, striking the Draykon in the chest. The warrior let out a guttural cry as he staggered backward, but he didn't fall. Instead, he lunged toward them, desperate for revenge. Caleb's heart pounded as he leveled his own blaster, lining up the shot. "No more chances!" He fired again. This time the shot hit its mark. The Draykon crumpled to the ground, his rifle clattering to the floor. "Move!" Veyra shouted, her voice cold and commanding. She stepped over the fallen soldier, her gaze already set on the next objective. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. They continued down the stairs, Caleb's mind racing with each step. Every second counted now. The Draykon were relentless, and the longer they stayed in Miami Prime, the more likely they were to be trapped. But there was no turning back. If they were going to stop this war, they had to act now. The sound of more explosions echoed from the city's core, and Caleb knew they were running out of time. The final battle was only just beginning, and it would take everything they had to survive. The war had come to Miami Prime, and now it was a fight to the death. The smoke-filled corridors of Miami Prime were a far cry from the gleaming metropolis it once was. The constant explosions had shattered the city's pristine surface, and the air was thick with the acrid scent of burning debris. Caleb's feet barely touched the ground as he and Veyra sprinted through the ruined halls, their bodies moving in sync with the chaos that surrounded them. Behind them, the sounds of gunfire and combat continued, but they had no time to look back. The Draykon were closing in, and the Zorathian High Court was their last hope. Veyra's sharp commands cut through the air as she led them through a labyrinth of corridors, her face a mask of resolve. Every step she took reflected the weight of her responsibilities. Caleb could feel the heat of the moment pressing in on him. They were running out of time, and the High Court had to be convinced of Thryme's betrayal before it was too late. As they reached the main chamber of the court, Veyra's voice rang out, commanding the Zorathian soldiers stationed at the entrance to open the doors. They complied without hesitation, knowing what was at stake. Inside, the court was in disarray. Members of the council were scattered, some on the ground, others scrambling to regain control of the situation. The sight of Veyra flanked by Caleb and Korath instantly silenced the room. Veyra wasted no time. She stepped forward, her voice steady and commanding. "Thryme has betrayed us all. The Draykon are not our only enemy. He has been working with them, feeding them information to destabilize our kingdom." The court members, still in shock from the recent attack, exchanged nervous glances. A few stepped back, clearly unsure of how to respond, but the weight of Veyra's words left them little room to doubt. She had led them through so much, and now her word was law. But then a voice from the shadows cut through the silence. "You think they'll believe you?" Veyra Thryme's voice was cold and venomous, his eyes flashing with hatred as he emerged from the corner of the room, flanked by his loyalists. "I'm the one who kept this city together, who protected the Enclave. You're nothing but a foolish girl playing at being queen." Veyra's gaze hardened. "You've betrayed us all, Thryme. The Draykon will stop at nothing to take this world. And with you in their pocket, we've lost the trust of our people." "Your people," Thryme spat, his hands clenched into fists. "You're weak, Veyra. You'll never unite us. The Draykon will burn this world to the ground, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." The room tensed. The air crackled with the weight of Thryme's words, but Veyra stood her ground, unwavering. Caleb's hand hovered over his blaster, ready for anything, but he knew this was Veyra's fight. "We're not done yet," Veyra said, her voice cutting through the rising tension like a blade. "We've exposed you, Thryme. You're finished." Before Thryme could respond, the chamber's doors exploded inward, and a squad of Draykon soldiers flooded the room, their weapons raised. The battle had arrived. "Veyra, we need to move now," Korath shouted, his voice urgent as he took a defensive stance. The Draykon soldiers advanced, but they weren't prepared for the ferocity of Veyra and her allies. In one swift motion, she drew her weapon, firing with precision as the soldiers fell. Caleb followed suit, his blaster cracking to life in his hands as he cut down another soldier who was charging toward him. The chaos erupted into a full-scale firefight. Plasma bolts collided with the walls, sparking on impact, and the room filled with the deafening roar of combat. Caleb moved with purpose, his instincts kicking in as he darted between pillars, taking cover before returning fire. His mind was clear, his focus razor-sharp. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for a future with Veyra, for a future where the Zorathian Enclave could thrive without the shadow of betrayal hanging over it. Veyra's movements were fluid, controlled like a storm. In full force, she was unstoppable, her every shot finding its mark as she carved a path through the Draykon forces. The court members, initially paralyzed with fear, now rallied behind her, weapons in hand, fighting for their queen. In the midst of the battle, Caleb caught a glimpse of Thryme. He was backing away, his face twisted with fury as he realized the battle was lost. But before he could escape, Veyra caught his gaze and fired the shot, hitting him square in the chest. Thryme crumpled to the ground, his treachery finally silenced. With the traitor defeated, the remaining Draykon soldiers were quickly overwhelmed. The room fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the distant sounds of explosions and the quiet hum of the city's failing infrastructure. Veyra stood at the center of the room, her weapon still drawn, her chest heaving with exertion. Caleb approached her, his heart racing, but his face was set in determination. "We did it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Veyra nodded, her gaze still fixed ahead. "It's not over yet," she said, but Caleb could see the hope flickering in her eyes. They had won the battle, but the war was far from finished. The Zorathian Enclave had survived, and the first step toward a brighter future had been taken. The battle was over, but the city was still reeling. Miami Prime's skyline, once a beacon of Zorathian achievement, was now scarred by the remnants of the Draykon assault. Tall, coral-like spires that had once glittered with bioluminescent light were now fractured, their glowing surfaces cracked and dark. The city was a hushed battlefield, with only the distant hum of repair drones and the occasional crackle of malfunctioning circuits breaking the silence. Caleb stood on the balcony overlooking the city, the cool breeze ruffling his hair. His eyes scanned the ruins below, the lights of the city still flickering like dying stars. He couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was far from finished. The Draykon were still out there waiting for another chance to strike. But right now it was the silence that weighed on him the most, the stillness that followed the chaos. Behind him, he heard footsteps. Veyra appeared beside him, her presence unmistakable, even in the midst of destruction. She didn't say anything at first, simply standing next to him, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "We've won," Caleb said quietly, his voice filled with the weight of everything that had happened. "But we've lost so much." Veyra didn't respond immediately. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a heaviness in her eyes. She had seen so much destruction, so much betrayal, yet she still carried herself with the grace of a queen. It was a strength Caleb admired, and one he could never fully understand. He turned to look at her, his heart pounding. "Are we really going to rebuild?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "After everything?" Veyra took a deep breath, her shoulders straightening as she faced him. "We will rebuild," she said, her tone firm as if stating a truth that was undeniable. "But it won't be easy. It never is." She glanced at him, then her violet eyes locking onto his with a look that seemed to pierce through him. For a moment, everything else faded. The rubble, the war, the city in ruins. They didn't matter. It was just the two of them standing at the precipice of an uncertain future. "There's something I need to tell you." Veyra said, her voice soft, but there was an edge to it, a note of vulnerability that he hadn't heard from her before. Caleb tilted his head, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "What is it?" Veyra stepped closer, her gaze not leaving his. "You and I, we're different. Our worlds are different, but after everything we've been through, I can't deny what I feel." Her words hung in the air, their meaning clear. Caleb's heart skipped a beat. He had been afraid of this moment, afraid of what it might mean. But now that it was here, he realized he had been waiting for it. For her, for something more than just the chaos, the war, the politics, something real. "I feel it too," he admitted, his voice raw, honest. "But we're still walking through the ashes of all this destruction. We have a world to fix." Veyra's lips curled into a faint smile. "And we will, together." The silence between them deepened, but this time it was comfortable. The weight of their shared experience, the war, the betrayal, the love, everything had led them to this moment. And though the future was uncertain, there was one thing Caleb knew for sure. No matter how broken the world was, they would rebuild it, together. As the stars began to pierce the darkened sky, above Caleb and Veyra stood side by side the city below, still in ruins, but the future glowing with possibility. The battle had been fought, and the war was far from over. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Caleb felt the stirrings of hope, a hope that one day they would build something stronger from the ashes of all they had lost. The sky above them sparkled, the distant stars burning brightly against the night. A new chapter was about to begin,